So Daniel and the team, you can present yourself first and we can start the session.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Hello and welcome once more on today's webinar. Today's webinar will be focusing on some new changes and features within last two new releases, which were and the second one will be released during this year. My name is Daniel Janota. I'm currently an ECCo analyst, and together with me there is Michael and Jiří.
Hello, my name is Michael Pinkas, and I have been working on the ECCo project for 2 years.
Hello, my name is Jiří, and I've been working on the ECCo project for the last 6 years.
If you will have any question, you can always type it to the chat, or you can raise your hands, and we'll then give you the space for the question and answer it. Regarding today's agenda, we will go through some new features for the spring and fall releases. There will be small comparison of the deployment with previous version. By the previous version, it's meant the latest ActiveMQ version, which is ECP 4.12 and EDX 1.13. So we will compare the deployment with that version. Then we'll go through some ECP and EDX configuration changes, maybe a bit more interesting thing and less high level. And then we'll share some information about the ECCo Artemis with you, and that will be followed, or just during that, there will be a practical demonstration of the new features for both spring and fall releases. So let's start with the new features on spring and fall release. So let's start with a small comparison with the ActiveMQ deployment, or the comparison of Artemis deployment and ActiveMQ deployment. As you can see on the left picture here, on the previous version where the ActiveMQ Classic was used, the internal broker was embedded to the application itself. So all this is basically part of the ECP endpoint application, and the same applies also for the EDX toolbox. And both the application, the ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox, together with its embedded internal broker, was connected to one shared database. However, this changed since this year's spring release, so version 4.14, where the ActiveMQ Classic internal broker was changed to ActiveMQ Artemis internal broker, and also together with this change, the internal broker is now a completely separate component, as you can see on the picture on the right side. Regarding the database and the connections, the ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox are still connecting to the database. In case of external database, it can be obviously the same one. And then they are also can connect to one shared internal broker, which that one is then connected to file journal on local, or in case of high availability deployment, to some shared file system. So that's basically one of the biggest architecture and deployment changes that the internal broker is now completely separate. Also, as the internal broker is not embedded anymore, some properties were removed due to that. Specifically, it was the JDBC properties for the internal broker, so the connection to the database for the internal broker, then also the external broker properties, and ActiveMQ credentials, which were used for some monitoring thing for the health check. So it was also removed because it's not part of the base application anymore. Also, the ActiveMQ database tables will not be used as the Artemis by default uses file journal on the file system. So also the ActiveMQ autocreate tables property was removed from the application. Now maybe let's focus a bit more, but still kind of high level, for the changes specifically in the Spring release. So the biggest, not the biggest, but the first change that you will see is the change of version numbers. Since this release, the version or the minor version of ECP and EDX were aligned together, so it won't be that confusing as it was before. So this release has versions ECP 4.14 and EDX 1.14. This means that ECP 4.13 does not exist. As of changes of some operating system support, the operating system versions are still the same. However, the central components, namely ECP broker component directory and EDX service catalog, are not supported on Windows anymore. There were no database support changes. The database versions remain the same, but there are some compatibility changes. Namely, the support of key-cloak authentication was removed. So the only external authentication option that still remaining is the LDAP. No worries though, there is also possibility of the key-cloak and LDAP integration, but that's a kind of different topic. Also, as the internal broker is now a separate component, and it uses different ActiveMQ, the naming of some Prometheus metrics has changed. No worries though, all these changes or name changes are mentioned within the upgrade guide, and there is a table that will help you to distinguish what metric is what, and etc. This also means that some Prometheus metrics were moved from the ECP endpoint to the internal broker. So specifically, the metrics used for monitoring of the queues are now present only on the internal broker. So some minor changes within the monitoring might be also required. And as of the fall release, so version 4.15 and 1.15, there is introduction of a Windows Server 2022, which was the support was added, and to keep like some normal number of supported versions, we have also removed the support for Windows Server 2016, as it is kind of older system now. There are no changes regarding the database support, still the same versions and the same databases are supported. And as of compatibility changes, the support of all network configuration syntax was removed. By old network configuration syntax, we mean the one without domains. So if you are using this older syntax and you will want to upgrade, you will need to keep this in mind. However, again, it is mentioned within the upgrade guide, and I think it's one of the first steps of the EDX upgrade procedure. Check this and make sure that you have new syntax. So let's check some ECP and EDX configuration changes. However, before that, do you have any questions to this high-level overview of the changes?
Yes, I have a small question on the removed database tables. You said there are database tables that aren't used anymore. Are these tables removed during an upgrade, or should I be removing these after the upgrade has been done?
I think they are not being removed automatically. You would need to remove them manually.
Is there like a list available of these tables, like all of the tables that aren't used anymore?
I don't think there is like specific list for that. However, basically all tables that contains the word ActiveMQ will be like deprecated and not used anymore.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and there's maybe another question from Morten.
Yes, I am thinking about the syntax of the EDX. Is it now a problem if I have 415, or I mean, maybe 115 of EDX, and there is a service catalog on, let's say, on the old syntax somewhere in the system? Am I able to retrieve service catalogs from an older EDX, or what is this change about?
There shouldn't be like a major issue. The EDX toolbox is basically changing the syntax for its local network configuration for quite a few versions now. And yeah, I think it should be okay. But
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
However, in case of any issue, we are still in SAT, so we can always report the issue.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Why not? So I think we can continue with the configuration changes. So again, let's start with the Spring release. So for 14 and month 14, there is one new mandatory property for both ECP and EDX. The property is ECP or EDX, depending on the application. CSRF secret. This property specifies a secret that will be used for hashing of the CSRF token. In general, there were several improvements of this CSRF. So that's property that will need to be added in case of upgrade. In case of installation, the property is obviously already present, and also it is filled in during the installation by some random string. As of optional properties, there are two new properties for certificate handling, basically. The first one, the ECP automatic update messaging delay hours, specifies a delay which will be used for the usage of the new certificates for the messaging, so message encryption and signing. Basically, what this does is that after the certificate renewal, it will apply the configured delay, and until this delay is reached, the old set of certificates will be used. And it's mainly meant there because of the delays during the synchronization. So once you remove the certificate, all the remote networks might not know about that immediately. The default value for this property is 20 days, and it is specified in hours. So you can change to 1 or 2 hours if you wish. And then there's the second one, that is ECP outkey server broken connection delay hours. That does basically the same, this time just for the connection to the ECP broker. So we can now specify maybe a different DLEs for that. There are also two new properties, another new properties for the queue prefix. The first one, the internal broker queue prefix, which is available for both ECP and EDX, will, as the name said, specify the queue prefix for the internal queues. So basically, let's say the ECP.endpoint.inbox will be then renamed to the configured prefix.ecp.endpoint.inbox. And the same applies also for the ECP broker queue prefix property. This one is available only on EDX, and it is used for the ECP endpoint queues. So the queue prefix in this property will be the same as the prefix on the ECP endpoint. This feature basically enables the possibility to use one shared internal broker for several instances of ECP endpoint, so like different EIC codes. In the meantime, before I continue, there's another question from Morten. So what is the default value for broker connection daily hours? It's the same as for the messaging daily hours. It's also 20 days, just in hours. So both using the same default value. As of remove properties, as I already mentioned, the properties related to the embedded internal broker were removed. So the GDBC external broker and active credentials properties were removed, as well as the health threshold, specifically for the internal broker queue size metric, which now is not like possible to get the queue size from the ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox itself. It is possible only from the internal broker, so this metric was removed. And also the old ECP certificate delay property was removed, and it was actually changed to the new two properties. Previously, the ECP certificate delay was applied only for the messaging, so only for the encryption and signing of the message. So the messaging delay hours basically exchanges this property. And as of some other changes with the update to Tomcat 10.1, some syntax update of server XML, specifically the syntax of HTTPS connector is required. And again, this change is described within the upgrade guide. So you can just follow that and update it. Are there some other questions regarding this version and its configuration changes? Probably not. So let's move to the full release. So again, versions 4.15 and 1.15. There is one new optional property, and that is internal broker VAQ prefix. That one is available for both ECP and EDX, and it's basically an extension of the previous implementation of the Q prefix. This property specifies can specify a different queue prefix for queues that are used by the business application. So in case of ECP, all those custom queues that you can use, also the default ECP endpoint inbox queue, and in case of EDX toolbox, basically all queues that are defined within the EDX YAML. So if you have some this application and you don't want to change it, but you want to use the EQ prefix, you can set this this property to empty, so no prefix will be used, and then there is no monetary change in this case on the business application. Also, regarding the internal broker and ECP broker, specifically the authentication plugin, some new properties for DLQ, cluster user, cluster password, and password codec were added. Those properties are used then for like the data replication between different nodes, for the usage of the Artemis command line tool, etc., etc. It's mainly used in ECP broker, as the ECP broker uses the authentication plugin by default. In case of internal broker, it is, I think, used only in case of direct messaging. There was also one property removed, and that is ECP pushes directory pushed TTL threshold. This threshold was applied for the component TTL of remote networks. So the TTL was not updated until this threshold was reached. This behavior was changed, this property removed. Since this version, the TTL for the components, the component TTL for all remote networks is updated with every synchronization attempt, every successful synchronization attempt. And also there were some properties modified, updated. In case of EDX toolbox, all the Spring data source properties were revised and aligned with current ECP endpoint configuration. This mainly improves the handling of the database connection, etc. So it might be more stable. Are there any questions regarding the fall release and its configuration changes? Doesn't seem so. So maybe let's move to the next slide, and let's start the part with information about ECCo Artemis, which will be presented by Michael.
So let's go through the changes, or rather the ECCo Artemis configuration. We will start with going through the installation paths and files, just to see the structure of the installation. But the Artemis comes with two folders, one base folder, which contains all the core files, which basically mainly are the jar files containing the actual broker. And then there is a broker instance, which is created from this core folder. And it is basically a lightweight instance of the broker, which is actually run. Artemis offers possibility to create more instances. However, ECCo Artemis comes with just one instance. It is good to point out that the ECCo Artemis comes with working configuration out of the box, so you can just start the endpoint and Artemis, and it will just work. Maybe minimal configuration will be required, right? Like the credentials and the authentication key store, but we will go through this in a short time. There are also component-specific configurations which can be found in the endpoint and toolbox configuration files, because the ECCo Artemis as is comes with somewhat generic configuration, which works with both of the endpoint and toolbox. And we can go through the files in the actual installation. So the base folder is located in the user share ECCo Artemis. And you basically don't need to touch this folder, and it contains the, as I said, the jar files, and basically it is the large part of the installation. And then we have the ECCo Artemis instance folder, which is located in the OPT folder. And we will go through the folders now. So first folder is the bin, the binary folder, which contains the Artemis and Artemis servers executable files. Basically, the service file is run for the service, which good to point out that the Artemis, of course, comes as Linux service by default, so it is possible to run it same way as the endpoint and toolbox using the systemctl command. Nevertheless, Artemis executable can be used as well, which would run the Artemis without the service. Then we have the data folder, which contains the file journal of the Artemis, which stores the messages. This is configured in the configuration file, which we will go through in a short time. Then we have the etc folder, which contains all of the configuration files. And we can see that we have the Artemis roles and users properties files, which contain the roles of the Artemis. By default, it comes with just single role, that is the IMQ. And by default, the endpoint user is defined. What we can see is we have the toolbox user as well, but that is modification, so because the internal broker is shared between the endpoint and toolbox. Then we have the Artemis users properties, which by default contain the endpoint user with password, which is hashed by default, and we have added the toolbox credentials. Then we have the Artemis profile, which basically is repro configuration to start the Artemis. Interesting part in this file is the XMS property in the Java args, which sets the maximum memory of the Artemis broker. Then we have the Bootstrap XML, which is used for the configuration of the web console. Broker XML, which is the most important configuration of the broker. We will go through these files in more detail in a short time. Then we have configure password scripts. Configure password script. Same script is present on the endpoint and toolbox and is used for initial configuration of the credentials. There is possibility to use plain text or hashed passwords. And it is delivered by us, and the ECCo Artemis, or let's say the ActiveMQ Artemis, does not come with this file by default. Then we have the Eurokia access XML file, which basically just contains the curse origin configuration for the web console. Then we have the default key store JKS file, which is also delivered by us, and by default it contains certificate that is valid for 10 years. Good thing to note is that Artemis comes with this key store, which contains just the certificate authority that is valid for the 10 years, and endpoint and toolbox contain certificate signed by this certificate authority, so you can use this by default. Of course, it is recommended to use custom key stores, same thing, basically as with the toolbox and endpoint integration in the 4.12 versions. Then we have log4j properties to configure the logging config, which relates to the Artemis roles and properties files, and it is used to refer them. We have the properties login module here, which is required. In this file, it is possible to configure also anonymous access to the broker, and then we have the management XML file, which is used for another configuration of privileges. As we can see, the IMQ role is used here. Okay, let's quickly just see also the ECP endpoint JMS folder, which now contains, previously it contains the active MQ configurations files that were used. Now it is used for just to store the component specific configuration files. And these files are not directly used. These would have to be copied into the OPT ECCo Artemis folder, which we were in. And we can see, or not yet, but basically this configuration is better suited for the ECP endpoint, as it has all these other settings. We will see in the generic configuration file that there is not this part regarding the ECP endpoint queues. But we will go through this, I think, now. Of course, all of this information is described in the ECP documentation. Most important things are covered by us in the installation of in the ECP ECCo guides. But if you would want to configure some additional things, it is good to refer to the official Artemis documentation, which can be from the internet or is referred by in the ECP guides. So let's start with the Artemis configuration, the broker XML file. This file is used for the configuration of the broker, and most of the configuration parameters are stored in here. As I said, there is this in our installation guide. We can find some of the most important parts of the configuration. It is the chapter internal broker configuration. In the documentation, we can first find the key store configuration, basically the paths that it is located at. It is the key store GKS we have seen. Then we have the key store properties that would be applied to the applied in the broker XML. We will look at this. Next, we have journal buffer timeout. Basically, what this is that Artemis stores all the messages in memory and flushes the messages into the persistent storage, the data folder, in intervals that are configured by this journal buffer timeout. We will see how to configure it and how to choose correct value. Then we have configuration of the audit logging plugin, which is delivered with the ECCo Artemis. One thing to note, as the internal broker is now not embedded, the audit logs related to the messaging and mainly the internal broker are now located in the ECCo Artemis logs. It is no longer in the ECP endpoint audit log file. You will find this in the ECCo Artemis logs. Of course, we will configure or see how to configure this in a short time. Then we have a small chapter about how to configure the TLS version 1.2. By default, the internal broker comes configured to use the TLS 1.3. See the version and the ciphers recommended, and that would be it. So now let's go into the ETC broker XML, and let's go through the configuration. First thing we can notice is the name element, which contains the name of the internal broker. This value you can set to any value. By default, that is this, that it is used to with information that it uses the SSL JKS, and this value is displayed in the Artemis console. Then you can see that the persistence is enabled, of course, same as with the ActiveMQ broker. In this section, we can see the directory settings, which specify where the file journal is located. By default, it is the data folder. Also, one thing to notice is that there is comment prefixed with the HA, which basically means in case you would configure the high availability setup, you will need to pay attention to the elements below it. We will not go through the high availability setup in this webinar. This will be covered in the HA webinar that is on the 24th October. As I mentioned, then we have the journal buffer timeout, which basically specifies how often the messages are flashed into the persistent file journal. This is done periodically due to performance reasons. By default, the ECCo Artemis internal broker comes with the value of 20,000. However, for your system, it might not be the optimal value, and to determine which value to use, there is possibility to execute the Artemis executable in the binary folder with the option perf journal. And once we run this, we can see that there were some tests run, and it is recommended to use 20,000. One thing to note is that the Artemis broker has to be stopped. It cannot be running during to run this command. Small recommendation is to run this command multiple times. Although it says it performed 5 tests, we can see that we got a value of 20,000, and in the second attempt we got 12,000. This is of course dependent on the load on the server that is currently present. So I would recommend to run this command with delay of few seconds, maybe minutes, just to be sure that the value is accurate. Another interesting property we have is the max disk usage, which determines how much space the file journal located in the data folder can use. We can see that the value is by default 90%, which means that the Artemis can use 90% of the whole server disk space. There is no property that would say like that you can say only use 100 gigabytes. You have to calculate this using this property. So let's say you would have 100 gigabytes disk, and you would want just 10 gigabytes to be used. You would set this to 10. One of the most important parts of this configuration is the acceptors part, which contains basically the configuration where the internal broker listens. By default, it is configured to listen on all network interfaces of the server on the port 5672, same port as the ActiveMQ broker used. We can see that the SSL is enabled by default and that key store used is the key store JKS in the etc folder. On the end of the acceptor, we can see the TLS 1.3 enabled with the ciphers. This value, the 4 zeros, can be set also just to the local host if you want to limit the access to the internal broker like that, or it can be the IP address of the server. We can notice the HA prefixed part, which is used for the high availability setup. I will skip this for this webinar. Next, we have the security settings and other settings. Which has the match hashtag, which basically says that all of this configuration will be applied to all of the queues on the internal broker. We can see that expiry queue and that letter queue configured here. Difference between the ActiveMQ and Artemis is that in ActiveMQ there was just the DLQ queue. Now we have the expiry queue address defined as well. This means that if the message expires, it goes into the expiry queue, and in the DLQ queue, it will end up in case of some exception or error in the processing. This can be on the Artemis side, or this queue is also used by the ACP endpoint and toolbox. We can see that there is no limit on the number of the messages. We can see that then paging settings for all of the queues, which we will get. I will go through this in a little more detail after a while. In this section, we have the addresses defined. By default, it is just the DLQ and the expiry queue. One thing to notice that we can see address and queue. In the ActiveMQ broker, there were queues that were either queues or topics. This is change in the Artemis broker, and in the Artemis broker there are addresses which contains the queues, which can be anycast, multicast. So there is this difference. So if we would refer to the queue or address, we can basically, during this webinar, it means basically the same thing. On the end of the configuration file, we can see configuration of the plugins. First, we can see the metrics plugin, which enables the Prometheus metrics to be exposed on this broker. And then we have the broker plugin ECCo audit logger plugin, which basically enables the audit logs. As I have said, the logs were moved to the Artemis audit logger, and which logs that would be? It would be the connection to the internal broker queue or message sending and so on. We can see this is the definition of the plugin, and nested we have the property key and value. We can see the ECP components type, which with the value of internal broker. This can be set basically to any value, and it is used in the audit logs. For the ECP endpoint, you can see the ECP endpoint. Then we have the ECP component code, which by default is change.me component code. And in this field, we can put for example, the component code. However, as the internal broker is now shared between the endpoint and toolbox, it might be good to refer that it is the endpoint and toolbox as well. And the internal broker can be also shared between the instances of the endpoints and toolboxes, which would be, let's say, more registrations of the endpoint that would have different component codes. This value also, you can put anything. It is just for the logging purposes. So let's say this internal broker would be shared between two endpoints. We could put something like shared internal broker for production environment. But this is just, this part is up to you. What I have skipped intentionally was the max size bytes in the address setting. This value of 100 megabytes basically says that every queue can use up to 100 megabytes in the memory. After this threshold is reached, the queue will go into the paging mode, and extra messages will be basically paged in the file journal on the persistent storage. This limit is applied to every queue. It is not shared between the queues. We can find shared limit for all of the queues a little higher in the global max size property. You can see that by default it is 800 megabytes. This property sets maximum memory limit for all of the queues combined. Once this limit is reached, all of the queues will go into the paging. This would go, even though the queue would have, let's say, one megabyte of messages stored in it, it will go into the paging once this limit is reached. And further property and place where the memory limit is configured is in the Artemis profile file in the Xmax property in the Java args. This limit sets the actual usage allowed for the application. We can see it is 4 gigabytes, and the limit for all of the queues was 800 megabytes. Due to performance reasons, it is recommended that the global max size in the broker XML file is less. The Xmax property should be like twice or 4 times more. This is just for the performance reasons. This would be all for the broker XML files. And maybe if you have any questions regarding this configuration.
Nothing new in chat. So.
Actually, I do have a question. You mentioned earlier that this Artemis broker can be shared between endpoints. However, I guess you would have to configure your endpoints accordingly so that like messages aren't getting intermingled, right?
Yes, for this, the new property for the queue prefix is used. We will see this property in a short time, but you would have all of the endpoints will need to have different queue prefix. This way, the messages don't get shared between the endpoints.
Okay, thanks.
So probably no other questions.
Okay. So let's continue with the web console configuration. The access to the web console is configured in two files, in the Bootstrap XML and the YOLOKI access. This is documented in the ECP installation guide, chapter installation verification. We can take a look. At the end of this chapter, or rather middle, we can see now that the Artemis broker is running on the port. The web console of the broker is running on the port 8161. By default, the web console is exposed just on the local host, so it is not accessible from different location than the server itself. To configure access from different places, we need to configure it in the YOLOKI access XML and the Bootstrap XML. Just to see this in the documentation. And let's see how to configure this. So first, I will go into the Bootstrap XML file, which by default, there is this line containing the localhost and the port. The localhost is basically the network interface of the server on which the broker is listening. Same for the port. What we can put here to allow access from any server, we can put either 4 zeros to allow access from anywhere, or we can set the IP address of the server as we can see here. This means that the internal broker is listening on this IP address with this port using the HTTP protocol. Nested in this element, we can see the metrics var, property that is the Prometheus metrics, which we will go through. Second thing we need to configure is in the YOLOKI access XML file. By default, we can find the allow origin just for the localhost, but to allow access from any place, we can set just the asterisk, which will match any address, or we can set the address on which the internal broker is listening. We can maybe now open the broker console. For the internal broker, there is the endpoint password credentials by default. We can log in. But as we can see, we are not logged in. Basically, what this is that Artemis broker has some issues with this, and if you logged into multiple instances, or I'm not sure how this works, you need to clear the cache of the web browser, or just for this single page. Now we should be able to log in.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is just the Artemis behavior, and there's not much we can do about it. So be patient.
I hope this will be fixed in the future version of Artemis broker. So what can we see here is the name of the internal broker This is the value set in the broker XML name. And then we have acceptors and addresses. In the acceptors, we can see our acceptor with that we have defined that is called the IQP as internal. We can take a look. This one, the default one with the SSL enabled. Another thing we can see is the addresses. Addresses folder, which contains all of the addresses on the internal broker. We can see that we have the address for, let's say, the endpoint internal outbox. And then we have the queues, anycast, and the actual queue of the internal broker. In this view, we cannot see much. So if we would go here, and in this menu, we can see other options like the connections. Here we can see that there is connection using the endpoint user from the local host. This would be the endpoint connected to this internal broker, and also the toolbox user. This would be the EDX toolbox. Using these connections, there are sessions, which are basically the consumers and producers during queues. But the most important or most interesting part is the queues tab, where we can see all of the queues. First thing we can notice that we have the ECP endpoint internal outbox, but prefixed with the slot EP queue prefix. For the toolbox, we can see the slot TB. This is used this is used when you want to use multiple endpoints using single Artemis internal broker. We will go through this in a short time.
Yes, I mean there is question from Max. So go on.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe you're going to mention it later. So just tell me if you do. I noticed that when you have the Artemis broker running and you have an endpoint connecting to it, then and you register that endpoint, then the TLS certificate that Artemis uses isn't updated. I mean, I guess obviously because you can use it for multiple endpoints, but then, and as you can see here, like the certificate, I guess it's just the installer cert. Then is your recommendation to have a properly verified connection, like transport connection, to manually exchange the key store of the broker with one that has a proper certificate in it, or is there like another way to have a verified transport connection here?
Let me open the acceptor. Need client out is disabled, which means that you only need the certificate authority to match between the client and the server, the endpoint and internal broker. By default, the Artemis internal broker comes with the key store containing a certificate authority, which is present in the out key store of the ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox. Therefore, they can connect. This, of course, applies only to new installations. And in case you are upgrading, then you have to make sure that the certificate authority is present also in the key store used for the connection on the endpoint side.
And also the certificate itself, right? Not only the CA, but the certificate that is used by ActiveMQ.
As the client out is disabled, you don't actually need the certificates to be signed by the certificate authority. The most important thing is that the certificate authority is present in the key store.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and maybe there is a note from Morten that is worth to mention that I'm not sure found out that the simplest solution for the remote login to Artemis console is to comment out strict checking in your key access. However, I'm not sure that might have some maybe security outcomes from that. So it really depends on the approach.
From what I understand is if you would set this to the asterisk, that means that the console, or rather the JMX, is accessible from anywhere. And if you comment out the strict checking, this means that you don't need the course header in the HTTP request. So yes, you can comment this out and the console will be exposed. However, that is, let's say, some security concern that you have to evaluate. So if there are no more questions, let's go through the web console quickly. So we have the queues tab, which has all the queues. Here, what we can do is to browse the queues. Let's say the message count. If we click the message count, we would see all the messages here. From administration point of view, what is also interesting is the operations tab. Now, for the ECP endpoint handler send, which I opened, we can, these are the JMX operations. So what we can do is to browse the queue, maybe enable, disable, or for some debugging reasons, we can pause it or resume it back. What other options are here is that we can also send the message manually, but you will usually not do this. But what we can do here is to purge and delete the queue if necessary. Let's say this would be the, let's go into the DLP queue. Let's say we have filing messages here for some reason. We can go into the delete queue tab and purge the queue right here. You can see the queue was purged, although it was empty, so nothing changed. Are there any questions regarding the web console? Options of it or something?
Probably not. So let's continue. So now we have user authentication part. Speed up a little bit. As I have already shown you, in the Artemis users, you define the user equals password. And in the new users needs to also be specified in the rows file separated by comma. I recommend not to put spaces, as it does not omit them. This is configuration of the ECCo Artemis internal broker. And basically changes in this must be reflected also in the configuration of the ECP endpoint. So if we go into the ECP properties as we know them, we have the out user and out passport properties that must match the configuration in the internal broker. As now this is not embedded, this is basically the client for the internal broker.
Another thing is the LDAP and Activity Directory configuration, which we will not configure here, but we can see that the ECCo Artemis also comes with configuration files adjusted for the Activity Directory and LDAP. What we have to do is to take contents of the LDAP folder or the Activity Directory folder and copy them into the main etc folder. If I would open it, the login config, we can see the LDAP's login module with some values redefined that should be adjusted to your needs. We can see the, let's say, the LDAP trust store, key store, IP address, and the port, connection frame, and everything. It should be similar to the configuration of on the ECCo endpoint. So it is possible to integrate the LDAP into the ECCo Artemis as well. Something we have already talked about a little bit is the integration of the ECCo endpoint and EDX toolbox with the internal broker. It is described in the installation guides. So let's open the ECCo installation guide, internal broker configuration. And in this chapter, we can see that we have to configure the properties. We have to make sure to be configured. They are similar with the properties, or they are reused properties from the ActiveMQ configuration. However, in this, you are not setting the properties for the ActiveMQ broker, for the internal broker, but you are setting where to connect, not where the internal broker is running. So if I would open it, first thing is we can see is that the authentication is of course enabled by default. That is that we are using the endpoint and password credentials together with the SSL configuration. Here we can see that the out key store is used by default with the ECP model out certificate. This is the certificate used by the endpoint to connect to the ECP broker and for the authentication for the component directory and synchronization requests. And of course, this certificate is not signed by the certificate authority of the ECCo Artemis internal broker. That answers the questions a little more. What else we can see is the Q prefix and VAQ prefix, which we will show in a moment.
Yeah, maybe just briefly stop you. Oh, what's this? Another question.
Okay.
Maybe regarding the certificates.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. So if I do not change the key store in the Artemis broker and just leave it as it is during installation, the endpoint will still properly connect to it, even though it doesn't, like, does it even check the authority of the Artemis broker certificate?
Yes,
By
it does.
default?
It does. I will probably open the certificate so you can see it. That would be better. So on the top, we can see the certificate keystore JKS that is present on the in the ECCo Artemis folder, which contains this ECCo Artemis installer cert key pair signed by the certification authority.
By self-signed.
Then we go into the out key store in the ECP endpoint, and we can see the same authority present here as well. This authority, as the authority is present in the out key store, it is used for the connection, for verification of the connection.
Where does this come from in the auth key store?
Yes, so if you would create a new installation of ECP endpoint, this certificate authority is present here by default. However, in case of upgrade, you will need to copy the certificate authority into the out key store. Maybe during the upgrade, there is key store created, the default key store created.
It should be on the Linux, not on Windows.
So basically, there will be the out key store jks.rpmu that would contain this certificate authority during the upgrade.
Okay, so the self-signed certificate is available in all the artifacts, so they can, like, out of the box communicate with each other without me having to exchange the certificates first.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there is also another question from Morten. When an ECP endpoint updates its certificate every 11 months, is it then necessary to restart Artemis in order to load the new keystore JKS from ECP? Well, it depends. It depends if you're reusing the certificate from the ECP endpoint, so the one from the ECP network, then the certificate will be like renewed and changed, but the Artemis should like reload its kind of like certificate context or something like that. So the restart itself should not be necessary. Or you can also like use, and it is recommended to use some completely separate certificate, especially for the production environments. But in general, it should not be necessary.
Okay, just to make sure I understand. Previously, when we had the internal broker, ECP got a new certificate every 11th month, and it reloaded the configuration, so Tomcat kind of detected the new key store, so everything worked at least on that level. And now with Artemis, because I see that the way we are set it up, we are still using the key store from the ECP for the in the acceptor for Artemis. So yeah, we're still using, yeah, maybe it's that one or the key store JKS. And then did you say that Artemis will detect a new file that is created by ECP or not?
Just to clear one thing quickly, the key store present in the acceptor is the ECCo Artemis. Although the name is same, like key store JKS that is also present in the endpoint, it is not the same. It is different key store. It is not referred to the ETC valid of the endpoint.
Okay, just let me clarify. So because I think, at least I think we have used it like that. It could be that it was not intentionally, but definitely we are using the ECP endpoint key store there. You mean that we should create some other certificates there, not reuse the ECP certificates?
Well, it is definitely recommended for the production environment. Like reusing the ECP certificate is also a viable option. But obviously, if you want to have like security connection between them, it might be better from the purely from the security point of view, whether you use basically anything else than the default one. And regarding the ECP certificate specifically, it just depends, like on
because
policy.
because the create certificates is also a little bit of a hassle, and you have to renew them if you're going to stay on this safe path, so to speak. You cannot just have a certificate signed for the next 10 years, I guess. So therefore, I think it's not it will not be too uncommon to maybe use the ECP certificates and yeah. Well, then I suppose you have to just restart the Artemis every time you receive a new key store from every 11th month or something.
No, it shouldn't be.
Shouldn't?
No, probably just when the certificate authority expires, then that would make sense to restart it, but not the register, not after the renewal of certificate on the endpoint.
So you think Artemis will detect the change in the file?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, Max mentioned within the chat an idea of some dedicated guides for the certificate handling, etc. Or in the future maybe some extension of current guides. This is a pretty good idea. If you wanna like kind of do such thing, you can always contact the ECP at ENTSO-E.eu or just create a ticket in the ECCo chair for that, and then it will be analyzed, etc.
Yeah, just to add a little more detail to that short comment is I think something like, hey, this is how practical certificate handling within an ECP network works. Like, hey, you create a CA. I mean, there are guides within the documentation, but they are kind of spread out in different chapters in different files, right? But something like, hey, this is an overview of how certificates are used. You create a CA, and then you have that intermediate CA, and you create that, and you sign it from the root CA, and then you distribute the certificates to all your components, and then you create certificates for these and stuff like that. I think that would really help, like in a practical sense, right? For example, to answer such a question, like, yeah, what happens if a certificate expires and I create a new one? Like, where do I have to distribute it? Or if the CA certificate needs to be revoked, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a great idea. There is only like one question from like practicality point of view, as some companies can have different policies, etc., etc. But that is maybe discussion for some other time. If you raise a ticket, we can then discuss it within the ticket. So on.
Yep. Yeah. So as mentioned, yeah, we can consider it depending on, we already have lots of documentation and might be a simpler way to guide it within the documentation. So we'll check that. It can be raised. So Max, you already have access, I think, to our Jira. So you can raise a ticket there and we can discuss it further.
Sure thing. Thanks.
So
just keeping the track of the time. So we have around 20 minutes left. So I would, I don't know how many topics is still pending, just to keep quickly check on the time.
we are at the end of the Artemis, and then we have the new features.
Okay, so let's see, and if needed, we can combine this depending on the others' availability, but I would like to, because I know we started late, but let's see.
Yeah, maybe we can speed it up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, in some places where it is possible, yeah, let's try to do that.
So as I mentioned in the ECP installation guide, we have the properties which to look at to be correct, to be aligned with the Artemis configuration, that is mainly the out user and out password, by default endpoint password. But in case you change it in the endpoint configuration, you also need to update it in the Artemis configuration. Then we have the EDX installation guide, chapter internal broker, which will contain similar information. Of course, we can see once again the IP address of the server where the internal broker is running. Something to note that we have the internal broker host and ECP broker host, which remains the same configuration as on the previous versions, but probably now it refers to same values. Once again, it is important to use correct user with the password and key store and key prefixes. So this would be everything for the Artemis configuration structure and some intro for the Artemis. Maybe if there are some questions regarding the Artemis.
Yeah, probably not. I think everything was said before, so can continue.
So let's start with the practical demonstration of the new features in the Spring release. That would be the 4.14 and 1.14. So first, what we have is the Artemis probability use metrics. As mentioned, the metrics were moved from the endpoint to the Artemis broker, and the way to access them is just accessing the IP and port of the server /metrics, and here we can see the regular view of the Prometheus metrics. Things that changed are the names of the properties, of course. So let's say we have the Artemis address size instead of, I'm not sure what it was on the action view, but basically this is described in the upgrade guide, which we can have a look at quickly, probably. In the upgrade guide, chapter new metrics, and we can see the mapping of the metrics. On the ActiveMQ, we had this metric. On the Artemis, there is this metric. Some of the metrics are missing. Some should be additional, probably not contained in this full table. So in case you are monitoring these metrics, you will need to change the host and the naming of them in your dashboards of the monitoring. What might have been noticed that you can access these metrics without using credentials. This exposed without authentication. Maybe just for the reference, the metrics configuration once again. On the end of the broker XML file, we have the definition of the plugin, and in the Bootstrap XML that is used for the web console, we can see the URL used for the metrics. This can be, of course, changed to your needs, I think. Next, there is new property on the central ECP broker that is used to refer how many days there are until the expiration of the authentication key storm or the certificate. So just in the presentation, you can see it here. It is the ECP broker days to close it, certificate expiration, and value of 245 days. So that is nice little improvement for the monitoring.
And a quick question, is that expiration to the closest certificate of any type, or is it the authentication certificate specifically?
This is on the ECP broker, which only contains the authentication certificate. So basically any, but just the one.
All right, thanks.
On the EDX service catalog, you could previously upload any network configuration without validation that you have uploaded the network configuration to the correct service catalog, which of course is not a nice thing. In this release, what have been added is that when we download the configuration, we can see the name of it, the network configuration and version. However, addition here is the elephant, which is the component code defined in the configuration. Now we can see that the network configuration is for this service catalog. We can go and upload it, and it goes without any issue. However, if we would specify other value here that is not the service catalog, we will get the validation result informing us that the component code does not match the component code of this service catalog. So this is just to prevent accidental uploads to the wrong service catalogs. Then we have already mentioned the delay properties for the newly renewed certificates on the ECP endpoint. Previously, it was 30 minutes before the renewed certificates were used. This value was now increased to 20 days. The value is defined in hours, so by default it is 480. And it is possible to configure different values for the out key store that is used to connect to the ECP broker, to the central ECP broker, and separate value for the messaging. As already mentioned, this is mainly because if you would have two ECP networks synchronized and you would be sending messages across the networks, and there were some issue, let's say, with the synchronization, the endpoints would not get synchronized between each other. Same for the ECP broker. If the sending ECP endpoint would use old, or if it would use the new certificate, the message would fail because regarding the ECP broker, it would not be possible to connect to the broker. And regarding the messaging, the message would fail on the signing and encryption, or rather the decryption of the message on the receiver side, because the receiver side would not have the newly renewed certificate present. One of the larger changes in this release of improvements is the queue prefix properties, which are present on both toolbox, endpoint, and service catalog. Basically, the main idea behind the queue prefixes is to allow multiple separate ECP and EDX components to use a single internal broker instance. So let's say you would have a network with 5 endpoints, 5 different component codes. You can use just a single internal broker. And you don't need to have 5 internal brokers running, because that would be 5 extra applications. It is somewhat recommended to use same prefix on the endpoint and toolbox. It really simplifies the configuration and to not to make mistakes. So here we can see the properties. One important thing that in 4.14 and 1.14 there are only the internal broker queue prefix on the ECP, and on the EDX there is just the internal broker queue prefix and the ECP broker queue prefix. The internal broker BA queue prefix was added in the ECP EDX for 1.15. Basically this release fall. And now what the queue prefixes are applied to. The internal broker queue prefix is applied to all of the queues. I will open the internal broker once again. And if we go into the queue tab, as already mentioned, we can see the slot EP queue prefix used. For the toolbox, you will be able to see the slot DB queue prefix. This is applied to all of the queues. And let's take a look into the configuration. So in the ECP endpoint, if we scroll down into the internal broker section, we can see the queue prefix defined here as slot EP. Then this queue prefix is applied to all of the queues, as was mentioned. On the EDX toolbox, we would then scroll once again to the internal broker section, and we can see the queue prefix slot TB. This is applied to all of the queues. And then in the section of the ECP broker, we can see the slot EP, because this is the value defined in the endpoint configuration. For this reason, it is good to use same queue prefix, just not to make the mistake. However, as the queue prefix was applied to all of the queues, this would mean if you had some integration using your business application to the toolbox or endpoint, they would have to use this prefix as well. For this reason, there is the BA queue prefix property that is applied to the business application queues, which for the EDX toolbox are the queues defined in the IMQP endpoints, the outbox and inbox. If we would take EDX scripts and search them in the console, we can select the name column contains, and we can see the EDX endpoint outbox having found consumer, meaning that the toolbox uses it, has the EDX toolbox BA queue prefix. Main motivation behind this is that in case you would not want any queue prefix for the business application queues, you can just go here and you can put an empty value, not comment out the whole property, just empty value, and this would disable the queue prefix and once we restart the EDX toolbox, we will be able to see that the toolbox uses the queues defined in the EDX YAML as they are defined here without the queue prefix. On the ECP endpoint, this is the same. However, the BA queue prefix is applied to the inbox, outbox, and reply queues, which are used by the EDX toolbox, which we can see here in the presentation maybe a little better. That if I would go into the endpoint configuration and set the ECP BA prefix, then I have to go into the EDX configuration, and the ECP broker queue prefix must be the same. So it would not be the ECP prefix, but the ECP BA prefix. The toolbox already started. We can see the consumer being on the queue without the prefix. This is regarding the properties for the queue prefix. Maybe if there are some questions regarding this or anything from the 4.14.
Doesn't seem to. So maybe we can continue with the follow, please. I'm just checking it, just like 3-4 slides until the end. So yeah.
So as already mentioned on the EDX, the support for old network configuration syntax was dropped and can no longer use it. This is changed on the service catalog, so you can upgrade the service catalog, and older toolboxes can still connect to this service catalog without any issue. This is mentioned in the EDX upgrade guide for the service catalog, chapter 6.1.1. So let's go quickly just to see it. Just a small chapter how to upgrade the configuration step by step. So that should be somewhat self-explanatory. One of the largest new features in this fall release is the option to make database backup and restore. What this basically is that in the ECP and EDX graphical user interface, we can go into the settings tab and we will see two new buttons that allows you to create a backup and restore the backup. The backup contains all of the tables in the database, but the messages tables. So basically the backup would contain, let's say, the application properties, the message paths defined, but the backup would not contain the messages itself. So the backup is, let's say, just the most important things that you need to during the restoration process. This process would mainly be used during some disaster recovery scenario where the endpoint or concurrent directory had to be reinstalled.
Documentation, if I want to do this programmatically every day, for example, to retrieve the backup, I mean?
Yes, it is possible through the GUI, of course, and also REST API. We have it documented in the administration guide.
Mm-hmm.
We have forgot to make which chapter it is, unfortunately.
Maybe just go to the left and go for backup or something. Yeah.
Chapter just for this. This what we have described here is what files you should manually backup. That would be the source, the ECB properties. These files are not present in the backup itself. The backup is just the database tables.
Mm.
But then it should be
Okay, but maybe you can maybe find it later after the meeting, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But
this is the chapter, the correct chapter.
okay, okay.
We can see the tables that are backed up. The backup is zip file containing CSV files, one CS file per table, but it should not be something you have to worry about. And in the end of the chapter, we can see that you do it using the REST API. You would use either post or put request to these URLs on the component.
Okay. Yeah, and to figure out the details, I just look at the GUI, how it uses it, maybe, and I can, because probably have some details there on how to.
You will, of course, make the backup and restore it. So you would have to log into the administration account, go to the settings page, and if we scroll down, below the runtime configuration, there is a new section just for the backup. We can see create backup and restore backup. And if I press the create backup, I can see that zip file was downloaded. It contains the component code and the timestamp in the UTC format. And once I open it, we can see the backed up tables. It is just simple CSV file. So we just see them just for the application property table. We can see the table definition and the values. So for, let's say, the time zone, we can see there is UTC.
And you can actually import this table runtime.
Yes.
Okay.
Now to restore the backup, there are two options, or three. One is the REST API, of course, but using the GUI, you can either go here in the settings tab and use the restore backup button, or there is or if this would be the new installation of endpoint and it was not registered yet, on the registration page there is also option to restore the backup. To restore it, you just press the button. It informs you that all data will be purged and new will be imported. In case there is some error during the backup restoration, the operations should be rollbacked and the database won't be changed. So let's proceed. Now we can just select the zip file. Then we have 10 seconds where we just wait for all of the processes on the endpoint to end and finish. And once that is done, we can see that the file was uploaded. And immediately after that, the configuration is reloaded, and that's it. That's become basically the restoration process done.
Very good. Excellent.
One thing to note is in case the component directory would be restored, there is one exception that you should pay attention to. So let's say I would create a backup on the component directory. And after the backup was created, endpoint would change some of its value, contact information or message paths. Everything will work just fine. However, if I would then go and restore the component directory from the old backup that does not have these changes included, the endpoint, it will be required on the endpoint to manually push the configuration so the changes are reflected. So let's say the configuration of the backup was created on the component directory, then you create a new message path, and then you go back to component directory and restore it. The component directory does not have information about message path. Therefore, you have to push it on the endpoint manually. To improve this process, there is already created ECCo ticket that will probably include it in the next release, the 4.16, that will push the configuration after restoration. But until that is done and implemented, the component directory administrator will have to inform all of the endpoints to push the configuration just to be sure. The network will continue working just fine, but this information will be missing, so there could be some weird behavior after the restoration process, but nothing critical.
Yeah, but in general, when you are like restoring the component directory, it's a like big thing within the ECP network. So I think such things are like normally communicated to the whole network, and in this case especially, it's still a big change within the network.
Yeah, I think this is more useful for endpoints than for the CD. So that you can restore an endpoint. I just have a follow-up question there. Okay, let's say you have a week-old backup of the endpoint and you restore it just like you did. Maybe there has been some changes in the network. Maybe some new some endpoints have changed their certificates, for example, something like that. What will happen then when you start up the endpoint with a little bit old component directory copy? Will it immediately retrieve the new component directory from the CD to make sure it communicates with the latest and greatest, or could potentially some endpoint communication fail because now it's some outdated information?
Well, initially, the ECP endpoint will still have like the older version of the component directory XML. However, after the like first synchronization attempt, a successful synchronization attempt, it will be updated and it will get all those informations. The only thing that can happen in that is when you're restoring the component directory, then there might be a moment when the endpoint is like authenticated or synchronized anonymously, but still that's something that will be, let's say, resolved by itself with another synchronization. So in this case, it shouldn't be like a huge issue. The only thing that can potentially make a problem is when you restore backup with some, let's say, already expired certificates or something like that. Like you renew certificates, then restore the backup before the renewal. In that case, it might be a bit sketchy, especially when the old certificates are, for example, expired. But still, general approach, if you create new backup after the successful certificate renewal, I think you're completely safe.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It depends a little bit on the default synchronization interval, for example, which you have with the component directory. And I don't know if it's 1 minute now these days or 5.
Still 5. So up to 5
yes.
minutes, that endpoint will have like all the information, but
yeah.
after
So people should know that okay, you can back up, but maybe there will be, let's say, a 5-minute window where some communication will fail. So I was just thinking about if it would be proper in the kind of reload configuration process that you perform, that you try to synchronize with the component director as soon as possible as part of the kind of whole reload process. But that's of course and for a next version in case.
Well, I think it might be already covered with the one already mentioned ticket, because in case if it would like just start the push configuration process, part of it is actually starting of the synchronization job. So that's basically probably already reported. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Are there maybe other questions regarding this feature?
This is one of the huge ones. So.
Yeah. So just because we are 9 minutes above, so let's we can continue. I think a couple of slides left, so that yeah. So let's finish it so that we don't need to cover it again next time. And
yeah,
sorry for yeah. So 10 minutes more, everyone. Thanks for your attending.
One of the last feature that we will mention here is the connection to unreachable ECB brokers. Firstly, an unreachable broker is a broker that was either revoked in the network, the component directory, or there is some network connectivity issue. The endpoints will no longer try actively to connect to this broker. In the road management background job, it is checked whether the broker is accessible. If it is, then everything works fine. If it is not, the connection will be attempted every minute because the road management background job runs every minute. Previously, it was 1 hour, it is now 1 minute. Also, with the revocation of the ECB broker, once the endpoint synchronizes, it will detect that the broker was revoked and will stop the connection to the broker immediately. In case that the broker would be inaccessible, then any other accessible broker will be used immediately. This behavior is basically very similar to previous. It's just about the connection to the broker, which would, in case of some network connectivity issue, overwhelm the logs. And last thing.
Yeah, there is just maybe a small update, small info regarding the Docker deployment, especially the obtaining of the Docker images. Obviously, both TCP and ENTSO-E packages come with the Docker environments, as well as like obviously the ECCo Artemis. And there are 2 ways of obtaining the Docker images. The first one is using the Docker Hub repository, which is private. You need to ask ENTSO-E for the access, etc. That's the way you already know, and the way that has been used for past, I guess, few years. But still kind of newly, there is an option to download the Docker binaries directly from the ECCo web page. So if you go to one of the links that is mentioned on the slide, you will get the standard form for the installation, for the download of the installers. And there is also option to check the Docker binaries check button. In that case, you will, in the same way, just choose the version, and an archive will be downloaded with the images that you can just put to the server and import it to like local repository for the Docker. Yeah, so you can just check the Docker binary, fill the rest of the rest of the form, then submit it, and you will get the link for the download. So yeah, that's still pretty new thing. Still one of the things that we got some questions about that. So the client component, yeah, it applies only for the client component. The central components are still need to be like approved by ENTSO-E. And this information should be also mentioned within the installation guides, chapters, Docker support. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe I just showed the documentation briefly. And yeah, the prerequisite is right here. So the access via the Docker Hub, or alternatively you can use this. So the ECP endpoint, index toolbox, and the internal broker can be obtained from here. I think the internal broker is then part of the ECP endpoint specifically. So you might need to download the whole ECP for that. Yeah, then the rest of the chapter is the same. There will just added some notes to add also the internal broker, etc. So yeah, so if we can just go back to presentation, and yeah, do you have any questions? Additional? If not, then we would like to thank you for your participation, for your attention, and for your questions. Especially those are always the best feedback that we can have.
Yeah. So thank you, Unicorn team, and everyone also to joining. As mentioned, we are starting. So there are 2 more activity, or this month 3 more scenarios or webinars planned. Next one is on the window installation, and then Unix, and then availability. I will send the invite, updating the link to join. I think there is some issue there, so by end of the today, I will send out an updated invite with the new links for the next. So next is on 4th at the same time. So thank you, everyone. If there are any further questions, you can always contact us via our email ID. And recording from the today's session will be uploaded by next week on our YouTube channel, and I will distribute the link for the YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter via the website of ENTSO-E. And we have a monthly newsletter also to provide all this information, the changes and any new decision that we are taking. So thank you very much for staying for 16 more minutes, and have a nice day. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.